Good day, beautiful people. Welcome to another episode of Kiko's Free Thinkers Forum. This is episode 68, believe it or not. And we're joined by a
Oh, I'm
repeat
short.
guest. What's that?
I should have been the next episode. Anyway,
We're joined by Gavin Bonney. He's a repeat guest. He's running as an independent out of the state of Oregon for the United States presidency, the office of President of the United States of America, the highest office in the land. You guys can go back to episode 37 and watch our first interview that we did together with Gavin Bonney. I just want to say welcome back to the show, and we can't wait to hear some of your views, and we appreciate you accepting that invitation again.
yeah. Oh yeah, no problem. I appreciate the support. I I keep coming back to this. I put it down sometimes for personal health reasons, but I keep coming back to it. I think I really want to do it, and hopefully this time around I can get some outside support.
Well, in that vein, we will talk about this some with the people in the field running with against you for the office of President of the United States, and we're not talking about the figureheads on TV that people already know about those names. We're talking about people who are true independent candidates and running outside of the Red Blue Alliance, is what we call it here on Kiko's Free Thinkers Forum. I just want to give an ad and just say that thanks to all the listeners and viewers. We've officially reached 90 different countries in the world, all 50 states, United States. So we've almost reached half the world just on my small platform. And we're going to continue to grow. We're on the cusp of something major. I can feel it. People have already sent me messages and stuff. People are following me that have millions of followers on their platforms. And that kind of goes into a point I want to mention with Gavin and the rest of the independents and third party candidates running for office. It not only pertains to people running outside of this colluding blue red team, the Democratic Republican Party, the Republican Party. Um, we also face this in independent media. We have a lot of people who are so called independent media that don't promote some of the smaller independent channels. And so we're not going to grow on our own. We need the support to grow. So I urge my listeners to simply subscribe for free. I'm not asking you for a penny of your money. I'm simply asking for you to subscribe if you like the content and share it with your friends and family. And that's the way independent media can grow. And you can like the videos that will help with the algorithm. We have to go against the algorithm. They're shadow banning certain channels because of the type of content we talk about. We talked about Palestine the day before yesterday. We talked about Julian Assange yesterday. So we don't talk about just sports and music and pop culture stuff. We talk about very serious issues. And so I urge Gavin's audience and anybody that's following this forum, because people are watching it. I can see all the statistics on my end. Please give us a subscribe and like if you like what you see. If you don't like what you see, you don't have to pay attention to us. But pretend that we're just your favorite celebrity, your favorite musician, because you're up in arms, you're ready to buy tickets and spend your money and break the bank to go to the concerts. So you can at least click the independent media channels for free because people are watching the content. So don't mean to rant too much, but I think it's an interesting observation that you made off the air about the questions around your visibility, your campaign taking off the way you want it to. And just to make another announcement before we start this interesting conversation, episode 68, I want to say that there's going to be a presidential forum in December. It is official. Everyone has agreed to appearing on this forum. I'm going to be the sole moderator, but there will be audience questions. There have already been several questions fielded from the audience that will be directed towards the 5 candidates that are going to be a part of this presidential forum. Gavin Bonney, who I'm speaking with today, is going to be one of the participants. Brittany Jones, who's also running in the state of Oregon. I don't know if you know who she is, but she's running. That's another thing. Someone that's in
I'm
your
a
own
hermit.
state and you're completely unaware of them and they're unaware of
Yeah.
you. But that's what independent candidates have to deal with, the suppression of the algorithm, their searches not being found when you type their names in, because I've tried typing in everybody's name and it doesn't come directly up on the Google search like it does some of your major candidates that are running. Jasmine Sherman, they're running under the Unicorn Party ticket and Green Party ticket as well, based in North Carolina. Mike Termott is a libertarian running out of the state of Florida and Virginia. and Hashaki Nichols is running out of the state of Georgia, unaffiliated under the Redemption Party banner. So we have a plethora of people running different types of ideas, but now the attention focuses on Gavin, Mr. Bonney. I want to ask the first question. You actually have an audience question, so I want to get that out of the way because people are following the content in the forum. And this question comes from Anthony. He's one of probably my more devout listeners lately. He found out about the platform. He's really been promoting a lot. So I appreciate Anthony. I give a shout out to him, especially a shout out to Randy for really promoting the content and everyone else who shares Kiko's Free Thinkers Forum content. This question is, how do you intend to move Congress and create change? I think people are desperate for change to happen right now, but this person wants to know, what are some of your plans to move Congress in the direction that you want to move them into and to create the change that we need as a country?
Well, the first and most obvious thing would be term limits. I mean, that's such a simple and it's just such a simple idea. And I think the majority of people, if you sit down and talk to them, agree that it's a good idea. And there should be term limits to each different seat. And I think similar to the military, if you take a certain seat at a certain level, maybe you shouldn't be able to go back down to another seat. Now I know there'll be backlash with that. One of the things that I've always thought of is an age limit. I probably won't talk too much about that because that's definitely like, well, how do you not be ageist, right? But the main thing would definitely just be term limits. It's just so obvious. But when you do the term limits, you have to do something about the lobbyists because there's too many of them. But I'll deal with it as it comes. So
what specific term limits do you have in mind when you say that? I totally agree, and I think most people would agree. Everyone says it, even on the Democratic and Republican sides. They say that there needs to be term limits, but what does that mean in a Gavin Bonney administration?
Oh, probably similar to the president, like 8 years, maybe 12, just so you can kind of be outside of a couple administrations. And just because the nature of those politics are a little different. But I also, in general, I think I want to do a lot of what's the word? Consolidation of government in the first place, because the tax money should be going back to the people, not to nothing, basically.
When you say government consolidation, are you talking about shrinking the government?
Shrinking or moving positions around, making sure that every position is filled and productive. I think that there's a concept of no petty laws or useless officials. Some people might know where that comes from. And I think that that's a brilliant idea, because if we are a country that does have our First Amendment and everyone is independent and a free thinker, we don't need too many checks and balances, right? Like a true anarchy, people are running themselves. So you want to get as close to anarchy as you can. But obviously you need a little bit of control so that people aren't running around murdering each other and all that.
See, now that's interesting, because I listened to our first episode probably 5 different times.
Yeah.
And we started out talking about like your idea of what government is, just the overall concept. Yeah. And you mentioned something about anarchy in that piece, because I asked you, what does it mean to be an independent? And you kind of talked about how you've always been an independent, more or less. But you have to expand on that for people, because that scares a lot of people when they hear the term anarchy. Right. How do we debunk what anarchy means to you versus what people could take it as meaning in a negative sense?
Well, right. And a lot of it comes from, I have an affinity for the psychology of martial arts and things like that. The anarchy and martial law are kind of like a two-sided coin in my view, my perception. And yeah, that like they use, like, the government that's established now uses anarchy and martial law kind of as a scary concept. right? Because in anarchy and martial law, you do have complete control over yourself, which leaves, you know, leaves the avenue open for evil to be done, right? Um, so it comes down to just, in order to live close to anarchy or martial law in peace, it comes down to individual people just kind of learning how to take control of their lives better and taking advantage of that First Amendment right that is special to the United States.
Are you equating anarchy with martial law? Like you have to elaborate on that
Yeah.
some. So because martial law to me means something completely different from what I
Yeah.
hear as anarchy.
So
As someone that has anarchist leanings themselves.
so anarchy, right, is just no government, self-governs. Well, martial law is basically the same thing. It's the law of war, the law of survival. So that's why I call it a two-sided coin. You know, one hand washes the other. I think anarchy and martial law kind of go together.
Really?
Mhm.
Really? They seem like polar opposites though.
That's why it's a two-sided coin. One hand washes the other, right? Yin yang kind of
I
idea.
get you. I get you. But do you think that that's a little bit too simplistic? Because there's a lot in between those two, right? When you
Right.
agree?
Yeah. And um there is a higher level of thinking, I think, uh maybe I've been exposed to with it. But um yeah, it's just when people don't have that blanket, the security blanket, something like telling them what to do or what is the right way, as opposed to being able to lead themselves, it's scary and it can be manipulated, you know, for good or evil. Um,
I see that point. I definitely like. I get that sense. It doesn't
yeah,
really matter. It kind of goes into the whole debate with authoritarianism. What type
right,
of authoritarianism do you prefer? I don't prefer either one. So
right, exactly.
even though I'm a leftist, I don't want any sort of authoritarianism. You know what I mean? It doesn't
Right.
matter what spectrum you're
And
on.
in anarchy and martial law, there is ultimately you're your own authority. If you get to the bare bones of either concept, anarchy or martial law, you are your own authority. In martial law, if someone attacks you, you have the right to defend yourself, right? So you are the authority. You decide whether you live or die based on whether you can defend yourself.
But
That's martial
martial
law.
law to me sounds like a scary concept. Martial law to me sounds like it almost get the picture that the military will be in control of everything. So in that
Well,
case, how would you be?
okay. So here's the thing about martial law. If the world were at martial law, which I mean technically the whole universe is at martial law, um, the safest place for an individual to be would be a military because that's where all the supply lines are, and that's where people are going to do what they need to do to survive, which is kind of a you could say that's a morbid concept or maybe a cynical concept, but that's how war is. But we know there's societies, you know, before predating the Western societies now where they went thousands of years without war,
Mhm.
and it's because they know these things, these yogic laws, these martial laws, the anarchy laws, you know, uh, concepts of self-preservation and just a it's just a higher level of thinking in the first place. Um,
Well, I don't know about the higher. I don't know exactly.
well, maybe, yeah,
I don't know about the higher level of thinking. I'm just saying. I'm just trying to clear up for my
yeah,
audience that's probably way more skeptical of these things than we are. Let's just say we have more of a relationship to these things or knowledge of these things. This is
right.
also
Like I'm
an
not,
attempt
I'm
to.
not saying, yeah, and I'm not saying I'm going to declare martial law or declare anarchy, right? But the idea is if you live in a free and open society and you have the First Amendment where people are, you know, free to practice their own religion, free to kind of say what they want to say, um, you know, that's what you're trying to get as close to as you can without bloodshed. And then that comes on the minds of the people and how we treat each other and our sense of community and society.
Okay. Is this something, because you tell me before we started, like you showed me the Art of War.
Yeah.
You had that book with you right now. Is this within the concept, within the Sun Tzu concept? Is that what you're getting at?
Um, Not necessarily. Um,
Okay.
well, some of the stuff I was going to pull out had a little more to do with economy, but I think that Art of War is that's a great, it's a great strategy book. It's a great book to read. Uh, Very peaceful.
Yeah, I'm just trying to clear that up, and I'll keep
Yeah.
an open mind because I'm clearly not feeling what you're saying about martial law, and I'm just trying to
Right.
clear. I'm just trying to clarify
And
that because
yeah,
um,
no,
because martial law to
I'm
me
just,
is almost like you're basically at the mercy of that authority, and you're right. They would, in the case the
you're at the
military would
mercy of
have
the,
the tools.
yeah, you're at the mercy of the authority that has, because there is no authority, you're at the mercy of authority, but at the same time, you have no obligation. You can keep running from it. I'm not I'm just trying to explain martial law a little bit deeper,
I
in a
got you.
deeper sense, so that you aren't as afraid of it, because there are concepts of it that you kind of have to apply to life and survival.
Okay.
I,
Okay.
you know,
I have
yeah,
to search more into that. Like I will. And I try to test myself. And I tell my audience to do the same. I encourage people to test your own views like you have to. That's how you get to the point where you are now. I wouldn't be at this point right now. And I know probably for yourself, you wouldn't be at the point you are right now in your thought processes if you didn't challenge previously held thoughts.
right,
So that's kind of the whole point. Even if it's something that
yeah,
seems like very different than what you're confronted with normally.
right. Yeah, but like what you're saying and what you're afraid of is totally valid, because if the government were to declare martial law, it would be military rule, and um it would and could be very scary, but it's just that's that's more of a around the peace pipe debate, because it gets really cynical and deep and talk about some kind of gross concepts of humanity. So, but
Um, what was I about to say? I've read a lot. You've changed your site some. Is that not true? Because it
um
looked different from when I read it the last time.
I didn't change anything
We're going to
that
go over
I
your site
know. Yeah, that's
in a
fine.
second, just to go over some of this. You emphasize economy, monetary policy.
Yeah,
We haven't talked about issues, necessarily cultural issues. In this forum, we do talk about cultural issues, but within the context of culture being in a progressive way, not some kind of a culture war lens. We don't see things here through a culture war lens. Things are pretty
right,
clear to me. It's clear that it's a class war. That's the war we should be fighting, and not a culture war, because the
right.
culture war is what distracts us from our basic necessities in the first place. I would argue, like we can have different
Exactly.
cultures and everything, but we also
The
need to be on the
culture,
same page. And these cultural issues have been used to divide us.
yep,
Um, but
divide
at the
and
same time,
conquer.
we can't ignore culture as well. And I just want to get one particular, because I think I've asked everyone their stance on immigration. Do you have an immigration policy per se in the Gavin Bonney administration? Like, where's your view on that?
Um, well, because of my views kind of on a North American Union, um, it would lead more to an open border between Mexico and Canada and the United States, but it would do so by raising all of our economies together, making us work together, right? Um, I think it's really, I mean, we know the whole wall thing is just stupid. We know it doesn't work because it didn't work in China. So, I, and they'll just dig tunnels underground. I think the thing to do is to find a way to legitimize these businesses in Mexico and bring jobs to Mexico and raise Mexico's industrial and labor force standard up to that of the United States and Canada, so that we're all putting out just absolutely badass products, what we are manufacturing. Um, and it's all homemade and it's all handmade, and you know, and that would lead to a society where you could have open borders and people wouldn't be sneaking across the borders to commit crimes and sell drugs. They'd be sneaking across or they wouldn't be sneaking across. They'd be going on vacation. And to not kind of want to get towards a society that could live like that seems a little silly to me. And why would you not want open borders and to be friends with your neighbors? Because if we don't start to do things of that nature, you know, we've got kind of some interesting things developing. Like Mexico and Brazil have expressed interest in creating their own economic summit with Russia and Saudi Arabia and China. And if we just ignore those kinds of things and don't try to work with all these other world powers and other world countries, our economy, the way it's built now, which I feel is mostly on war, is just going to crumble and fall apart. And we could possibly even lose the nation altogether.
Well, there's a lot there to unpack what you just said. You talk about this North American Union, which was interesting. I was reading over that last night. I don't even think we covered it the last time we talked, but you hit on BRICS. Brazil's already a part of BRICS Plus, is what I call it now. That's what it needs to be called, because BRICS had the 5 countries: Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. We have 6 new members of BRICS coming January 1st, 2024, including Iran, United Arab Emirates, Argentina, a South American country, Ethiopia, Egypt, Saudi Arabia. So you have a lot of different global South countries banding together basically against this Western hegemony. That you might as well throw Japan in, that makes you Japan, United States, Western Europe. But you also included South America. When I read your site, when you talked about this, you talked about more so an American Union. My question is, how do we get to that point with this, I guess, cooperation with economies and trading and stuff with Mexico and all these different Latin American countries and the Caribbean, when the U.S. has such a history of sanctioning countries that they don't like?
Yeah, well, I mean, you have to, a lot of my policy in general and military policy, foreign policy, we got to stopping countries from developing their own republics and their own nations. Like, that's just dumb. There's nothing wrong with nationalism. You can be a liberal nationalist. You can be like, if I was comparing myself to Vladimir Putin, I would call him like a conservative nationalist, and I'd be like a liberal nationalist. Right? I don't know. But so when you go through, like in the 80s, the Reagan administration knocked a lot of stuff down in Latin America. I don't have everything right off the top of my head, but I read about it in Manufacturing Consent by Noam Chomsky. A lot of people are familiar with that book. Yeah, I mean, if we let these countries develop on their own, and then they build their own middle class, and then everything is better, their products are better. And I think one way to get away from consumerism, which is really, I think, the biggest problem with environment, is to start building stuff in-house, making stuff more artisan, restoring things, not necessarily making it so you have to work 40 hours to survive. I mean, if you have time to prepare things and take care of things around your own home, you don't need as much money, you know. And there's just so much living that people aren't doing because of the almighty dollar and how out of control it's gotten out of, you know. And I think that building an economy off of war just doesn't work. If we built an economy off of helping each other, and, you know, there's just so much to be saved, environmental wise, money wise, effort wise, energy wise, and it's all common sense stuff, you know. And maybe it's a good time to bring in this art of war. In chapter 2, there's two passages. Let's see, number 6. There's no instance of a country having benefited from prolonged warfare. Right? And so then it goes on, and he talks about how when you defeat your enemies, you should forage all of their weapons and things like that. you get on to number 13 and 14. Well, it says, okay, you get 10. Poverty of the state causes an army to be maintained by contributions from a distance. Contributing to maintain an army at a distance causes the people to be impoverished, right? Because that's taxes. So if we're fighting somewhere for something that we're not going to keep, there's no reason to be over there, because all we're doing is just spending money for no reason. We're just maintaining war. And you go down here at 13:14. With this loss of substance and exhaustion of strength, the homes of the people will be stripped bare, and 3/10 of their income will be dissipated, while government expenses for broken chariots, worn-out horses, breastplates and helmets, bows and arrows, spears and shields, protective mantlets, draft oxen, and heavy wagons will amount to 4/10 of its total revenue. Well, that sounds exactly like where we're at right now with the United States. And this is a book that predates, I think, most of Western culture. So seems like there's a pretty obvious solution to all this.
Yes, and your overall, I got the sense that basically when I read your site, comparing it to a lot of the field, you come across as someone. We know that you were in the Navy. Brittany Jones, who is also running in your state as an independent, she was also a veteran. She is a veteran, just like you are. Two Oregonians in the race that I've interviewed. But I get the sense that you have anti-war like sensibilities. Like there's a very strong emphasis on your site that is senseless. There's no point of it. It's economically damaging. It's psychologically damaging. It doesn't benefit anybody. Infrastructure, it messes everything up. Like I get all that stuff, and it's clear. That's it. But it seems like, I guess what I'm trying to do is, how do we get from point A to point B? Because it's clear that the military industrial complex in this country isn't interested in what you're proposing. They're not interested in being diplomatic or peaceful, even not.
Well, they're not interested in it, but they're not going to have a choice if they want to have an Earth to live on. So,
and how so? Like, I guess how.
I mean, if they destroy the planet, they die too. I mean, that's the folly of the war pig. Like you're fighting a losing battle. There's nothing you can do to make that work.
Okay, let's go back, because I want to hear a little bit more about the North American Union. Is interesting because I get scared when I hear about North American Union, because the first thing I think of is NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement.
Right.
So let's just be clear. So how does that work out when we compare that to NAFTA, for instance? Like, how does the NAU, how is that beneficial to people versus the crap that Bill Clinton and everyone else was associated with?
The thing with NAFTA is a policy that allows you to run your business in a different country to avoid taxes, basically. I mean, that's pretty frankly it. These are business owners. So a great example. Let's just talk about Teslas or electric cars. Anyway, I'm a NASCAR fan. This would be fun. You got like the lithium and all the precious metals and everything that you mine for, right? And so there's like two reasons you don't do it in the United States. One, we don't want to destroy our federal lands. Like all of those types of minerals and stuff are way out here in, southeastern Oregon, northwestern Nevada, northeastern California. There's just a lot of nothing out there. But that nothing is very valuable. And it's been the subject of a lot of conspiracies. And anyway, you could mine for all those, minerals to build electric cars or whatever there, but then you'd have to pay American workers who are usually unionized or want to be unionized, and then they have to have benefits of some kind, and they have to be paid enough money that they can support their families and things like that. Or you can go to a country where there's constant fighting, right? These contractors, military contractors, are constantly performing coups, so that every time a republic tries to rise up on their own dollar and establish their own society, for better or worse, it gets knocked down. So that way, all these workers and slaves, that are, mining for lithium and whatnot, uh, they're in a society where there's not unions, there's not healthcare. They just mine until they die, and that's just stupid. Um, you start doing more things like North American unions, and if your European Union, if they kind of woke up and like worked with Russia, anyway, you could make the world a lot better place.
Yeah, and honestly, I feel like at some point, if the discussion is just too centered, it can just become exhaustive.
Yeah,
And I believe that honestly, Ukraine, Russia, that the European Union versus Russia, that stuff.
yeah,
First of all, if you have the wrong position, quote unquote, the unofficial
yeah,
um, stance on that, you're censored or whatever else happens to
right,
you. I don't know. So we know how that works. I mean, if you don't
yeah,
share popular opinion, I mean, yesterday I posted a small snippet of my first interview with Martin, and he was basically saying that Putin was a monster. If you
right,
listen to the whole interview, he didn't say that he agreed with Putin, but because he condemned the U.S.'s actions in the first place that led to this, which people can say what they want. Yes, Russia did invade Ukraine. No one's not saying that,
nope,
but there was provocation. To say that there's not provocation is being ignorant. And
right,
so, but if you say that even not, you can't even say that. You can't say that the U.S. has any culpability.
yeah. Well, and here's the uh my perspective. Vladimir Putin's kind of in the catbird seat with this conflict, because Ukraine's not a part of NATO, right? So if Ukraine joins NATO while this conflict is going on, which, and I think this is out in the open, um, that basically makes declaring war or attacking United States soil on the table, uh, for Putin. So that's a catbird seat. It's a leverage thing. Um, and if you watch Vladimir Putin speak versus our last two world leaders, uh, he's just a lot more aware of a person. Um, I think personally, because he's a martial artist, I could sit down and talk to him before I could sit down and talk to Donald Trump or Joe Biden, especially Donald Trump, because he's even said that working out's stupid, and I work out a lot, so I'm not with that. uh, uh, so um, and you listen to what he's saying, and Truth in Movies, Rambo 3. A lot of what's been going on since the Reagan administration and basically the Putin administration is basically little satellite wars between the United States and Russian contractors, and all they're doing is testing their weapons and their tools for killing other people. Do we really need to be doing that all the time, all over the place? Um, so I think if you kind of read between the lines, what's going on with that secondary, I mean, economy, I guess, is maybe they're trying to get away from, because if you study the U.S. dollar, it really seems like our currency is backed completely by the war complex. U.S. bonds, if you look back historically, and it just seems like they just took the word war out of U.S. war bonds.
Mhm.
I don't think that's a very good thing to back currency on. I don't think that producing war is gonna get us very far along as a society or a race. Uh, and it's also silly because then you look at the superpowers like Russia and the United States and China, and you think about things like going to space, and it's like if we would have been like working alongside each other the whole time, um, how much further along could we be? How much more knowledge about interdimensional and space travel could be in the public if if we were working with these superpowers, because I mean, you can you can you can advocate for whatever countries you want, but if you look at it, it seems like the United States, China, and Russia are kind of the stud horses. So why not bring them together instead of creating all this tension?
Well, I guess we need to be asking our leadership that.
Yeah,
You're posing up a lot of questions, but hey, I don't want them to live you a Putin puppet, Gavin.
uh,
Because no, but it shows
yeah,
you the sad state of um free thought that we're in this country, critical thought. Um Being critical of your country or your region is not a condemnation of the people that you live around or necessarily your country. It's a way to make your country better because we know that we can be doing a lot better. We can be working, cooperating with the world as opposed to bombing the world,
exactly.
sharing ideas with the world to be innovative in science, technology, whatever field we're talking about. That's what we mean with self criticism. Self criticism is a necessity. It's not something that you get to choose when you can easily point out deficiencies in other places. But
Yeah,
we're just as guilty when it comes to the power grabs and holding on to this idea of empire, which is falling apart. I think it's
yeah,
pretty clear if people have been honest with themselves that the U.S. empire is in steep decline mode, and not only does the economy reflect that, but the relationships around the world are starting to show that as well. Our leverage when it comes to just preemptively starting wars isn't the same as it used to be, and I think that all plays into it.
yeah. And yep, just gonna agree right now for a second.
No, you're good. I was going to, but since we're talking about this topic, and I must say that this has already become a very interesting conversation
Yeah,
because when I usually do these interviews, I have my basic points and questions, but it's a free flowing conversation. But that's a way to get the best out of the interviewer, I think, and out of the candidate. And this has been no exception. I think this is going great. And there have been some curveballs thrown in, but I like it. It's going to be fun
yeah,
to listen to, and hopefully everyone can share this with your friends and family. But I was going to ask you, you have a heavy emphasis again on military conduct and professionalism within the
mhm,
military and the way we're supposed to be a military. You talked the last episode about having a different function maybe of the military, not these
yeah,
endless wars, perpetual wars, but building infrastructure. You talked about Eisenhower. Can you
yeah,
expand on that a little bit before I get into one of my questions?
yeah. So the basic idea would be to use um, like your military force to rebuild the infrastructure and training, training to learn those jobs for people so that people can join the military, get their military service, still training combatives. I'd actually the standard will be going up if I win. That's you will be doing push-ups and sit-ups again. I'm not doing the planks. I'm not like this is ridiculous. You need to be fit to be in the military. Um, it's just the way it is because you have other people that are relying on you to be your teammate. Uh, I'll get away from that rant for now. But so I would still be looking to build the military, but I would be taking people home and we would be working on the home front and fixing the home front. Or if we did deploy to another country, I do the whole concept of the Navy is a global force for good, right? That's when I was recruited. You can go in there and you can rebuild places after a hurricane. We have the tools and the workers, and what they call pogue jobs. There's so many jobs in the military that are not combative, that do teach us industry and do teach us a lot of life skills and how to deal with people from other backgrounds. And the United States military is absolutely the most exceptional in that. And I plan on bringing that standard back to where it needs to be because it is uh, I mean, it's the greatest military in the world, and needs to just stay that way. I mean, it's and that'll go. I mean, that'll go through the whole government. My parents worked for the government, Department of Interior. My sister works for the Department of Interior. I worked for the Department of Defense. Just a whole common sense. Don't do things the stupid way anymore. Like, yeah, things are still going to be bureaucratic, but like create jobs that are actually getting things done and getting people taken care of and teaching people skills so that they can go into the private world and make their own money, or just stay with the government, make the military and government service a career path so you can retire in 20 years, and have basically what would be a universal income that you earned, right, through working and training, and then you'll always have those skills to take with you. um, like all the things that they recruit you into the military to do, actually do those things instead of you know get people to kill themselves. So,
Before I ask a question about pertaining to war, more or less, I wanted to. I've never asked this to any of the candidates because there's only one candidate that I know of, and Brittany Jones, that actually has an announced vice presidential candidate with them. Um, as far as you're concerned, have you thought about a vice president? And if not, what kind of qualities are you looking for when you make that decision?
um, there there's a few people close to me that I would consider, but the biggest thing for that decision would be that that person understands that I'm going to take a commander and chief approach. I'm going to take a very militant approach to the entire job. I want to go in and get it done and then get out and retire. I mean, I want to do something that I haven't really seen anybody do. I want to be the president and then take that $200,000 a year, uh, basically just be a human being and enjoy life, retire off of that. Um, and if people want to ask me questions after that, I'll still answer them, but I'm kind of an introvert. So,
But specifically for a vice president, like what exactly are you looking for yourself? Like, as
um,
in case something were to happen to you, someone else has to take over the country in this capacity.
mil- military service, military service will be a big consideration. Having an idea of where I'm coming from, what documents I'm reading. Um, and it could come from the known world, it could come from the unknown world. I'm going to have to trust the person as well. Um, but I think that's going to be that's like my main emphasis is the commander in chief, um, of the military, and they need to start acting like it, you know. And there's a lot of professionalism that's lacking from the upper echelon of our government.
So since we're on topic, and I'll urge my audience, if you haven't been introduced to Mr. Gavin Bonney before, episode 37 is basically his first introduction to the world as far as like public interviews are concerned. So go back and watch the episode 37 to get caught up to where we are now at this point. You have the Geneva Conventions posted on your site. You
Yep.
have the Uniform Code of Military Justice posted on your site. Can you explain to the audience what the Geneva Conventions are, just briefly? Because this is going to lead to a question that I have about something that we talked about yesterday.
So the Geneva Convention is the military law that the United Nations kind of agreed upon, after World War II. It says what is and isn't legal in war, and what you're allowed to do and what you're not allowed to do. The UCMJ, the United Code of Military Justice, that is the United States military law. And I think it's important for all politicians really to know those, because the oath you take when you go into office, either as a governor, president, senate, or an enlisted soldier, sailor, airman, marine, uh, you take an oath to the Constitution, and you are liable under the UCMJ and the Geneva Convention. And a lot of people are under the misconception that politicians are strictly civilian, but civilians are covered in the Geneva Convention. So even if they were strictly civilians, which they're not, because they're serving, you know, they're in government, they're voting on war. I'm sorry, you're liable to these two documents as far as I'm concerned. Um, and that's just it. You take that oath to the Constitution, which includes protecting against enemies, foreign and domestic. So it's really important to know that if there are laws for war, you should probably know what they are, or you could be punished. Because what, ignorance is no excuse or something like that.
I appreciate that explanation. I brought that up as far as the Geneva Conventions and the Uniform Code of Military Justice, because in an ideal world, this would be like the template, or almost like the manual you go by when, if we ever got to a point of warfare.
Right.
Um, Yesterday was the 17th anniversary of WikiLeaks, which was the publication, Julian Assange's publication,
Yeah.
that he started October the 4th, 2006. I had a third Assange panel on yesterday. So you're agreeing. So I'm assuming you know who Julian Assange is.
Yeah, I do. Yeah.
And I'm not throwing anyone under the bus, but you guys can judge your responses. There are some people that I've interviewed that don't even know who Julian Assange is, and they're running for public office, not just president, but they're running for various offices. And I'm just throwing it out there. I'm not making a judgment on people, but it's out in the open and people can understand. Um, so Julian Assange obviously means a lot to the forum. Should
Shout
mean a
out to
lot to
Edward Snowden
people.
too, if we're gonna get on that.
What's that?
Shout out to Edward Snowden too, if we're gonna be on,
Yeah,
on that train.
Snowden. There's lots of people. Edward Snowden was tried under the Espionage Act of 1917. Chelsea Manning, obviously, who was the person in the first place who gave the information, I think, to Julian. But I want to ask this question regarding the reason why he's in imprisonment in the first place. A lot of people think he's in prison because of the collateral murder video, which showed that a 2007 Baghdad airstrike attack, 39 minutes of footage. You see the Apache helicopters shooting civilians, shooting journalists, shooting people just like for no apparent reason. They just said fire, and that was all caught on tape. And I thought about you when I saw the Geneva Conventions and you posted that stuff. So obviously that means a lot to you. What would your response have been if you were president at the time when that happened? But it became public knowledge in 2010. So this is under Obama. So if you were under the Obama administration, if this was a Gavin Bonney administration, how would you have reacted to this type of footage from our own military doing this type of stuff? And what would you do about the Julian Assange case right now as president?
In the case of war crimes, I mean, it'd have to be a court martial, whether that would be a public court martial or not. I mean, I wouldn't have a problem with it, but I mean that would be a big deal in front of society. But yeah, I mean you're not supposed to do that. So that's a court martial. You're going to court. You're going to talk to the military judge. Have fun.
And regarding Assange, what capacity would you have to pardoning Assange? Now, right now, he's held up in the UK courts. He's in prison. He's imprisoned in Belmarsh prison right now in the UK. So he hasn't been extradited yet to the United States. We're waiting on this news any day if he's going to be extradited here or if he's going to remain in Belmarsh, or the Australian government's trying to get him, liberate him so he can go back to his country because he's an Australian citizen. But if he were to be extradited here, would you pardon him if you had that power?
Most likely, yeah, because he didn't violate anything outside of my moral scope. He exercised what would be his First Amendment right. He didn't do anything illegal. He didn't actually do anything. He just exposed things to the public that shouldn't be seen by the public. And so really the people that are going to be in trouble are the people that committed the crimes, not him, as far as I'm concerned. Of course, I'd have to sit down and talk to him. I'd have to sit down and talk to anybody, though. Like I said, I'm privy to there's the line of thought that there are no secrets. I rifle through declassified documents. That, you know, I'll be disgusted, but there's nothing that surprises me. The level of spirituality I've reached personally, I'll tell you right now, we're at a checkmate or a stalemate with any other world leader. I view everyone as equal, man, woman, opportunity, you know, perception. So he didn't do anything wrong. So he's probably going to get pardoned.
So that's interesting, because you mentioned something there that's not talked about. The people who actually committed the crimes are still free, but the person who reported the crimes is under condemnation in prison and persecuted for years. And it's he's, for us, there's no doubt that he's a political prisoner. He's being used as an example from our viewpoint. And this touches on so many human rights abuses. That's the reason why people should know who Julian Assange is. Because this is not just a press freedom thing. He is a journalist. He was a publisher. And if you all read the evidence files that Paula Iacella and Assange Defense Boston came up with, this 101-page document, go to episode 67 under the episode description notes, and you have access to the evidence files if you click on it. Susan McLucas was nice enough to compile everything into PDF form, so the public has access to this information that shows Julian Assange's press credentials. It's very much at the beginning of it. So there's no evidence there's evidence that he was a journalist. So this is no different than a journalist being in the field reporting on what they see. We had this going on all the time. I know when you were a kid, probably, I don't know, I'm older than you, a little bit older, not too much older. But I remember when I was a kid, they used to always emphasize the embedded journalists. They were out there in the field in the Gulf War. They would almost fantasize it. They would romanticize it. Just the journalists out there in the tanks with everyone. But this is different because he reported on something that's, you know, making us look culpable. But it's just, I don't know. It's a really confusing. It's a very scary reality to see that someone can be, basically they're losing their life because they reported on something that actually happened. And he wasn't even the person that originally had the content. So
yeah, I mean, and he's not even the only person. I mean, people see this. There are people my age that have literally just seen this firsthand, like actual combat veterans. I mean, freedom of press, that's your First Amendment. It's your First Amendment right. And I've always been one of those people, if someone tells me not to read something, that's probably going to be the first thing I read, right? Or at least I'm going to get the premise of that too. I want to have the premise of both sides before making my own decision on how to approach a situation.
I have a question about that, the First Amendment.
Yeah.
I'm going to read directly from your side, if you don't mind. Gavin Bonney shares Amendment 1. If you all don't know what the First Amendment is, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press, or the right of the people peacefully to assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. And then you continue. The First Amendment of the United States is the most important piece of legislation in the entire world. Without the First Amendment, there's no industrial or technological revolution. There are no civil rights movements without the First Amendment. Without the First Amendment, the world could not achieve what it has. Any country could have established the First Amendment, but we did. Without the First Amendment, there's no United States. My job as president, I feel, is to protect the First Amendment from those who oppose it. Without the First Amendment, there's no second, third, fourth, fifth, etc. amendment. In the spirit of the First Amendment, right to protest. But so the first sentence, you don't see it as hyperbole whatsoever. You don't see that as hyperbolic, saying that this is the most important piece of legislation in the entire world.
No, I don't, because it's the only piece of legislation that allows, or that says, every human is, free to be who they want to be. Every individual matters, essentially. Every individual thought. There, nowhere else is it written, and that's kind of my point, right? We all know these things because we live in our bodies, but there's nowhere else that it was written first.
Well, I guess it's not really rebuttal,
Yeah.
but my questioning would be, what's the use of it if it's not being practiced? What's the use of it being written down when it's not being followed, the example that's been written down?
Well, because if it wasn't written down, you wouldn't be able to argue with it. I mean, people have used it in court to defend themselves and to make their cases. So, because we live in a society, right, with checks and balances, we have to have it written somewhere. And to me, as someone who's not of a theological mindset, it's just very important to have that written down, so no one can walk up to you and take you from you. They don't have that legal right. So this opens the mind. This leaves the mind open and lets you know it's okay to be you.
Kiko's Free Thinkers Forum has a maximalist approach when it comes to First Amendment. Yeah. Having said that, I'm curious as to, you seem to share very strong leanings towards the First Amendment. How would you ensure that our free speech is protected under a Bonney administration, considering that censorship laws are actually increasing, and you've emphasized so much about getting rid of petty laws and all these unnecessary laws? What would you do to combat the potential of people being censored for having differences of opinion, for instance?
Right. So censorship, in the, I'll put it in Western terms, censorship to me is the work of the devil. It limits free thought. It stifles creativity. Like even if you are using terms in a derogatory way, that you're still, there's a lot of creativity. There's a lot of thought process that goes away when you limit what words people can use, and when you limit what ideas they can have. When everybody, well, if you're going to believe in God, you have to believe in God this way. That stops creativity. That stops free thought, because now people have to subscribe to and have to kind of follow along, but that's not what we want.
But I guess a deeper question I have regarding this would be the collusion of the tech corporations. Where do you see that? Do you see YouTube as a private company, Google as a private company, even though they have contracts with the government? So at that point, there's a breach. There's not really a purely private enterprise anymore, because you're working directly with the government. So would you do anything about that? Would you consolidate these companies? Like, what would you do about this censoring of the information through the internet, for instance, or certain platforms? Would you do anything about that?
I would do what I can. It's, a lot of algorithms too have to do with what catches your eye. My algorithms are different from other people's algorithms based on what I search for. There is the private content thing. Like if they want to only put out a certain viewpoint, they can do that, but they're at the risk of losing the business of people who want to think freely. So in a way, it kind of is self-resolving, because yes, you do, if it is a private corporation and they don't want a certain idea out there, they can limit and censor that. But if they don't allow that to be out there, that's potential money lost. But if you get enough people looking away from it, are they really losing money? Blah, blah, blah. You know, there's obviously a lot more to it. So
So you're saying there's nothing you can do about it if it's a private company. But I guess my question is, do you view them as purely private companies when you know that there's government collusion?
well, I guess what you could, yeah, what you could make an argument for is, as long as you aren't because I think this is how Copyright Act and some of First Amendment law works. As long as you aren't like directly asking for profit off of it, they'd almost have to legally post it, right? If you post it for free and you want to post it for free, that I think, then I think you could actually make a case that they're not private. If they're going to provide the platform for you to post for free, you could maybe make an argument that they're not private. And then you look at stuff, you know, the kind of information that they do shadow ban, that stuff is posted for free. And when you do find it, it's all free. So I guess the fight would be to get more exposure and for money not to put lies in front of truth, essentially. Because with the free speech, obviously the downside is that you could have people like Flat Earth Society, for example. I don't want to throw them all under the bus. There's actually some good ideas in there that don't necessarily have to do with flat Earth, but like, for example, like you can just create this whole Flat Earth Society, and that's your free speech, freedom of religion. You can just say whatever you want, and Flat Earth Society, they can all post whatever they want on YouTube as much as they want, and they can accept donations. People don't look for that, and then it doesn't get put in the front of the algorithms. I mean, for obvious reasons, but
Yeah,
that's
exactly. So yeah, because and you got a question, what is it actually threatening when you talk about,
yeah,
because some people would view, and this is the scary part. We talked about Ukraine, Russia. If you have a different view of that conflict, that has its own sense of ramifications.
yeah,
Because at that point, you hear about public opinion all the time. Well, when the public's opinion changes and it goes against what the government is selling up to us, there seems to
they
always be
change.
issues with that.
Well, yeah, and example of that kind of stuff. Russia in general, in the last probably 10 years, it's less and less Russian media that you can get a hold of, Russian or neutral, like pro-Russian or neutral Russian media. And then what you do get of pro-Russian media is like the worst of the worst, would be the equivalent to our fringe, like, you know, QAnon or whatever. You know, just kind of just nonsense. And
Mm-hmm.
they only want you to see that because they don't want you to form a balanced opinion on it. I mean, one of the things I kind of chuckle about, I'll bring up in internet debates on kind of like my private stuff. Like if you like Russia, I mean, you can actually Google. There's this beautiful little cartoony thing, puppet thing, Bill Cobb's Battles on YouTube. He basically takes the statistics of all the assets of whatever country, and they simulate what would happen if these countries had a war, and they take out the factor of alliances, yada yada yada. They actually did one on Ukraine and Russia, and it cracked me up because Bill Cobb, the character has a Russian accent. It's hilarious. Uh, yeah, he's like Russia doesn't even have enough assets. Like they'd get through Ukraine, but they'd just be so dilapidated and out of equipment, you know, to do a conventional war all the way across Europe, they'd be done. Or what you could do, you could literally just, if you attacked Russia on the other side of their front, and this is like we're at such a populated point in the world, like we know all these strategies, so there's no reason to be doing them. But you know, you just attack Russia on the other side on their eastern front where it's cold as fuck. But you know, and then you just spread them. You know, conventionally they'd be spread thin. That's why their catbird seat is to have that nuclear power. They have the biggest nuclear bomb, and if they somehow draw NATO into it, they, you know, they, as far as war strategy, they're in the catbird seat. But yeah, I mean, but it's just silly because they don't have much as far as conventional tools. And they'll just move on to the next conflict once, you know, if they finish this one. And so you kind of almost have to look at it like, you know, forest fire. They'll like triage a neighborhood, like it's going to burn through here. We're going to go over here. We're just going to let it burn, and we're going to lose a few extra houses or whatever here. Well, you can look at war kind of like a forest fire in the sense, especially these like 9/11 wars and the Gulf War and Vietnam, these very obviously industrial wars where we've sent our men and women out to battle with no intention of winning, no intention of keeping anything, no intention of doing anything but wasting and testing equipment. Anyway, you cut that off, and you cut it off right now. We're not even getting the recruits. People don't want to go to Ukraine. If it were, you've got more people committing suicide than dying in combat. That's actually like a 15 to 20-year-old statistic. That dates into the single digit 2000s. So yeah, you just got to cut it off. That's all there is to it. And there's going to be carnage, but at the same time, you know, if Russia's intentions really are to build another, like a secondary world economy or whatever, another dollar, what are they going to do if they win Ukraine? Build it back up? Maybe. I don't know. That seems like that would be the intention, right? Because as far as I'm concerned, if the United States is going to fight in a country like Ukraine, or let's get real controversial, say Israel, then I should be implementing US law in that territory as I win the battles, so that I'm not spending money on an endless war. It's like, if you want the US to come in and fight a war on your territory, for your territory, you will become a US territory. That's sound war policy. I don't really care how you shake it. So
well, so I guess some people make the argument that that's what happens, this Americanization, or
yeah,
or maybe that's not the case at all. Maybe the local culture is simply stranded once the occupiers leave. I don't know.
yeah,
But let's talk some about the economy and monetary policy. You have a television screen behind you. I actually
yeah.
want you to get up, and you can stay from that point where you are over there next to the television, and just I want you to read to the audience 5 specific categories and tell them the actual number. What is the current U.S. national debt right now?
So the U.S. national debt, 33,476,370,900,000. Oh, 371 billion.
And
That's
if you compare that to the median income, what is that?
okay. So your median income now is $36,046. Your median income in 2000, which is listed right below it, was $32,028. That's a difference of
Almost $4,000.
$4,020, $4,018. And so if you look right next to it, a new median home is 430,000. It's a little less, but 430,000. And in 2000, a median home was 167,000. I don't know how, if you're making $36,000, you're supposed to buy a $400,000 home. And if you go next to the national debt, you have your debt per citizen and your debt per taxpayer. Your debt per taxpayer is 200. If they were to call in their bet slips right now, every American taxpayer would owe $258,022. Who makes that?
I feel you say that's the debt for each person?
That's the taxpayer. The debt per citizen, if you were to every kid, woman, child, whatever, is 99,718. So you got $100,000 for everyone and over $200,000 for the people that are actually paying taxes.
And
And there's
what is the actual U.S. federal spending as we speak?
right now we're at 6,122,254,000. Yeah,
And
6.1 trillion.
and tell the audience where you're getting this information from.
This is usdebtclock.org. If you are an independent or a libertarian or even Green Party, you may have heard of this website even 30 years ago. This is the national debt clock. It's posted on Wall Street right out in the open, hidden in plain sight. And it very clearly illustrates how our taxes are not covering our spending, which is bad. I mean, that put it simply, frankly. And there's no reason to be running at a deficit and racking up debt, even if money is fake, which it is, but we should still use it. Because the mental drain and inflation and just the lack of the middle class in general,
Mm-hmm.
it's just dumb. There shouldn't be a deficit ever, especially if we're doing things like, let's see, if you add the interest to the defense budget, you're actually, let's see, you got 700, 800 billion. You have the entire deficit if you add the interest and debt and just defense. You can leave Social Security and Medicare out of there, which is what our taxes should be paying for. So, and those should be at a surplus, but that's a whole other thing. But yeah, so I mean, your whole deficit, you pretty much just get rid of right there,
Okay,
or
so
reallocate it. And then
you're
you've got,
getting to a question that I had. So to start out your initial point of attacking this deficit, this debt that we have, so you would decrease military spending, is what you're saying, and you would redirect that to Social Security and Medicaid.
um, well, I wouldn't necessarily decrease the spending, but that would be the idea in the long run. The bigger idea would be to reallocate it to, if we're going to spend it, bring it back to us or bring it back to where we're helping another country. Because we are also at budgets that are maybe a little over my mathematical intelligence level. But yeah, the idea would be to cut it back, or at least cut back on the part, the killing part, right?
Mm-hmm.
And get the budget balanced, get what we're spending there, make sure it's taking care of the United States first. You know, to just say I'm just gonna cut defense right out. Well, that doesn't even necessarily go with some of my other, personal philosophies. To just outright cut defense. But my whole idea in general with all of it is just reform, in all of government, because we have the pieces in place. We have the critical thought. There's no reason we can't simplify and consolidate our government to where it's functioning and helping the people and putting money in our pocket and putting our country back in the black and the green instead of in a deficit or in just absolute debt. Like $33 trillion. That's insane. That's so dumb.
You just said something there. You talked about, is it possible to reform the current state of the government that we're in? You seem to suggest that it's possible. I would argue that you would have to get rid of parts of the government.
Yeah.
I think that the government needs to be shrunk. But you say that it's reformable. Like how so? How is it possible for us to reform the government the way it is right now?
Well, that's part of the reform, is what you're saying. Like shrinking it, is one part of the reform, right? Another part of the reform would be just like listening to people's suggestions. As stupid as that sounds, you're like, wait, that doesn't happen in the government. Well, anybody that's been in the military or worked for the government is laughing right now because they're like, no, it doesn't. um, so, and that's all I mean by reform. And it's like, I'm not going to try and reinvent the wheel with money, and I'm just trying to get away from things that are toxic to the human race. You know, because it's an okay system. Um, you know, it's been manipulated a lot in a lot of people's favors, but I think you're also at the point, the people that are at the top of this, like there's so many zeros at the end of your wealth, like it doesn't even, like you who cares? I don't really care. Like, congratulations, you beat the game, you're a fucking trillionaire. Like, I don't care. Most people that I've seen that are like trillionaires and billionaires, I could pick up and throw. So I, who cares? Well, whoop-de-doo, you got all the money. Like, let's focus on like making life enjoyable for everybody else. Like, who cares how rich you are? I don't care.
Yeah, but I guess I'm not trying to put words in your mouth, but is
Yeah.
that somewhat contradictory? You say that the system is relatively okay. I guess you're referring to capitalism because that's what we live on.
No, I'm referring to modern money mechanics, like just how
Okay.
money's borrowed and lended, and like the concept of it. Like, I'm not gonna do much better than that, but it's the manipulators and then the consumerism, more so than capitalism, the consumerism, which just has people relying on the dollar so much. Um,
And
I
you don't
think
think
that,
that that's part of capitalism?
well, it is, but like that, I'm just trying to kind of pinpoint what I think is like the root of the problem. And it's the consumerism, it's the over, um, just that's the part of capitalism that's toxic, is the consumerism, that constant need for something new, need to, you know, nothing wrong with inventing something new, but constantly trying to get people to buy something new, to throw out the thing they already had, even if it works perfectly fine, and get a new one. That's the problem with capitalism, um,
Mhm.
is the consumerism, and a lot of that does fall back on the people themselves. But you know, if you know, we could just teach ourselves better in the first place. So
It's just and I'm not trying to be cynical, but I'm just trying to understand because I would like to think that I think on terms of monetary policy relatively sound. Um, I think there's a misconception that people who share, I guess, my worldview, because we all get labeled for wrong
right.
reasons. Erroneously, we get labeled. If you have socialistic leanings or anarchy, anarcho leanings, people will automatically assume that you don't know about the economy, that you don't care about the economy. That's not true whatsoever. The biggest difference I think between people who tend to be more left libertarian or anarchist and left versus people who are the right side of the spectrum that's anarchical or they have tendencies that kind of go away from mainstream conservatism, mainstream liberalism. I think we argue over what parts of government do we emphasize, what parts do we take out. I don't think any of us want to add more to government. Like
Yeah,
government's already huge. Like we need to find a way
yeah.
to make it more efficient.
Move everything around. Yeah.
But I may emphasize healthcare more,
Hmm.
student debt more, and a libertarian might emphasize something else more. But
Right.
regardless, it's like I don't think that's worth arguing over right now. But this is important because you made an argument in the document. You have a document linked to your monetary policy on your Gavin Bonney site,
Mhm.
which is accessible through his Twitter handle. And I'm going to link his Twitter handle, Mr. Gavin Bonney's Twitter handle, and his Google Doc, which is where you can find all of his policy information at the end of the episode description of this episode 68. If you go, I believe it's on the New Deal, it's one of your tabs where you talk about monetary policy. I read the document and you
Yeah.
said you brought up trillionaires and billionaires, but isn't that a problem? You blame the consumer, but yet you admit in the same document that you have posted on your site that there's a problem with money just being static. So
Yeah.
you only have so much money supply that's available. Even if we take out the printing money part of it, if you have a small elite group of people hoarding all the money, how's that not going to create a set of problems? Don't you want the money flowing?
Yeah, no, you do. I think you might be, let's see, let me scroll here for a second. I'm trying to understand the question a little better.
Yeah. Well, I
Um,
guess what I'm getting at is the consumerism line to me doesn't make much sense, because if you base it on the statistic that you're reading to me, the $36,000 median income, that's talking about basically any household, like that's all
mhm,
the money on average. So what money does the consumer even have? Is it actual real money at that point? Or is this
right.
credit
It's not a
included?
lot. Some of
Like,
it,
do they even have the money? Like, can we even blame the consumer? Do they even have money to spend?
right. And that's, I mean, and that's all kind of covered in the where the unfunded debt and interest. So that's all your student loans and your credit card debts and things like that. That's all the math on that. Um, what my thing about consumerism is actually just totally basically environmental. Um, like to get back to it, it's literally the consumerism that is the problem, not necessarily the spending money, the exchanging of money, but the um, you know, instead of keeping a car for 25 years, buying a new car every 5 years. That creates inflation, that creates debt, it creates waste, because people aren't taking care of their stuff. Um, that's more what I mean by that when I say consumerism is like the pinpointed problem with capitalism. Obviously, you need people spending money to keep your economy going in a fractional reserve system. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah,
So explain
yeah.
that. I was going to get to that question because the main premise talks about the fractional reserve system that we have. So what do you mean when you say fractional reserve system to the audience?
So a fractional reserve banking system. This is gonna be hard for me to explain. I posted the link. It's you borrow money from a private bank at an agreed debt that you're going to pay back, right? So that money is essentially backed by the debt, and then you have to pay the debt back for the rest of the money to exist. That's essentially a fractional reserve banking system, and how that works out in a lot of this tax stuff is um, you the interest on the money that we borrow. So the fiscal year, they borrow all this money to put into the system or to send for aid or whatever, right? That's borrowed at interest. Um, the rate of taxes that we're paying right now doesn't cover the interest. That's why we have a deficit where the national debt is going up. That's how, and that's how fractional reserve banking works in a nutshell. Um, there are people that are a lot better at this than me, but
No,
so
and you talk about um, the types of reserves we have.
yeah,
We have what you call fake money, which is paper currency fiat,
yeah,
and then we have money that's deposited in banks,
yeah.
and then you have what's the other part of
There's
the
just there's just digital money
and
actually.
then the
Even
digital money,
it all
basically.
it only exists digitally. Um, and that's where a lot of inflation comes from. And if you open up the book Modern Money Mechanics, where it actually just explains all of this in exact detail, when you take out $10 million loan, there's another loan on that $10 million, and then another loan, and then another loan, and it compounds down. It's all just, if you're a number person, it makes sense. If you're a little more right brained like me, you're just like, holy shit, why? There's just numbers and numbers and numbers for no reason. Um, so a lot of, I guess, with monetary policy in regards to fractional reserve banking is just, you need to simplify it so that inflation's not out of control, and so that people understand what's going on with their money, and so they're not, so if they understand how their money works, they won't be as stressed out by it because they'll know how to make it
I have a question about monetary policy. Mike Timot is running for president. Mike Timot is running as a libertarian. Mike Timot is an economist.
Yeah.
He has a PhD from the George Washington University. And I asked him, would you go back to the gold standard? Would you go back that far to the gold standard that was ended in 1971 under Nixon? Where is your stance on that? And I'll tell you exactly what he said.
Uh, I've tended to lean towards the gold standard being a better system, historically. You look at the history of banking and central banking and versus government banking. It was a better system for the people, but you also kind of you get to a point of wealth and technology that there's more information and material than there is gold to represent it.
Mm. And that's exactly what he said. It was that it would create a deflationary climate.
Yeah. So really, I mean, one of my things with money is you almost just have to suspend your disbelief in money. First, you have to know that money's fake, but then once you know that money's fake, you just suspend your disbelief and kind of view it almost as just a moral peacekeeper in a way. There's probably a better way to put that, but it does keep the peace. It keeps a sense of order. People get their dollars, and you don't have to barter. If you're someone who only makes pies, well, someone doesn't need a million pies for maybe their shoesmith job. Well, money eliminates that awkwardness of bartering, where it's like, okay, I don't need that thing though, right? So
Well, in that sense, you're arguing that money is universal. You're arguing that money does have a function. So
yeah,
so it must be real if it has a
right.
function.
But it's fake. Like it's
Yeah. I know what you
yeah.
mean. Like I mean, now you have direct deposit, which the document you sent me, I mean, basically it argues that a lot of people have direct deposit, and before they go
Yeah,
into the next week, they don't even have the money, the digital money in their account anymore.
yeah.
Like
Because all
they're
been
in the red
deposited
or
other places.
whatever.
Yeah, and it's just so funny. If you took, this is kind of an abstract concept, but if you just took money completely out of the equation, uh, could you still live your life like and survive? And you know what I mean? Like, do you
Yeah.
actually need it? So,
Yeah,
um,
but I guess the reality is that the people, if you're selling this message to people, if you're telling people this, and let's just imagine millions of people are following this, and you
yeah,
say that, I don't think people are going to fall with that message. They're not going to
right,
like that message, because the reality is that we all have to pay bills and stuff. I mean, we have to
right.
create whatever this fakeness is, these falsities. We have to still create.
Well, and that's what I'm saying. You just suspend your disbelief, and we still keep a monetary system in place so that we can pay our bills and function with each other in society. That's what I mean by suspend the disbelief. Um,
Now, you were saying something earlier when you talked about, you went over the statistics on the debt clock, and we appreciate you sharing that with us, because I
yeah,
think that will be new for a lot of people in the audience. Did you say, if I heard you right, that we're not paying enough taxes on the debt? Is that what you said?
yeah, that's why it keeps going up. Our tax rate, you know, doesn't keep up with the interest rate, and that's why the debt keeps going up.
So do we need to be paying more taxes as citizens? Is that what you're saying?
No, no, that's what a lot of people would say, though, right? And then what happens is they take more taxes from you, but then they're just going to spend more and they'll borrow more, and they'll just keep that deficit up and keep you going into debt. That's kind of been the policy since George Bush.
Mm-hmm. And I guess so. Let's go back to what you would do to, I guess, alleviate this tension that people are feeling. We talked about a universal basic income the last episode. I thought that was one of the
Yeah.
more interesting exchanges we had because it seems like some of the stuff on your site almost goes against what you were originally saying. Um, you seem to say that there's not a necessity for UBI. Ultimately, you concluded that because you thought that people will become lazy as a result of getting a UBI. That's what you said. Do you want to elaborate
Yeah.
on that, or
Right. Well, and it's more of just like the concept. If you're just handed something without earning it, you don't have much motivation, or you're less likely to have motivation. So my whole thing with a universal income would be like kind of like I was alluding to with the military services, um, maybe earning, like having set levels, right? You do your government service, you're set, you have an income now, you're this type of employee, blah blah blah. Uh, Maybe even you have set incomes. Like if you go do an odd job because your education in government or whatever, however it's structured, is at this level, you must be paid no less than this per hour or per day, et cetera, et cetera. And then on top of that, like I said, if you get, you'll get assessed, um, physically, mentally, and you can say, okay, just similar to like a VA percentage, like, okay, you need a little bit of extra income based off of this inability that you have here. And basically to like, you want to negate the straightforward concept of, even if it is at the end of the day just the same thing, just giving people money. You kind of want to avoid just that straight, you're going to get this money, um, you're just going to get this money. It's just not, it's not a good way to think necessarily. um, and like I said, even if at the end of the day it's really just a universal basic income disguised as like a disability check, I think that's better maybe than just calling it a universal basic income.
I guess I would challenge you only because on your own site you made the example. Even if you gave every person $1 million, the government would still have a ton of money to basically waste it on whatever they wanted to.
Yeah.
Um, So if they could afford, if the government, and I don't know how I'm supposed to be addressing government, and I
Yeah.
think that's the $1 million question. Like, what is the government exactly? But
Yeah.
regardless, this body that we know as the government that's supposed to be for the people, by the people, um, if the government can give $1 million to each person anyway, and you seem to suggest that we wouldn't be really any worse off than we are now under that scenario, depending on how the money is being allocated, then what would be the issue with the universal basic income to make sure people are able to at least meet their basic necessities? We actually have a candidate, Jasmine Sherman,
Yeah.
that's running. They believe they would actually get rid of Social Security, and they would universal basic income would basically serve as that would have been the function of Social Security and just getting rid of that whole
Yeah.
idea.
I get that concept. I've had similar concepts like run through my mind with Social Security and unemployment. Um, I just, again, it comes down to just motivation and still being human. Um, just to give it that label, right? That that you get this check because of, and there needs to be incentive. There needs to be incentive to earn more to keep people working too. Excuse me, I
Mm-hmm.
had to burp there. Because it is true. If you did, I think the studies from Indiana, they're talking about Nero. People start to come in from the rural areas and they stop doing their work and they stop producing things because they can get this income. So the more the more open I guess it's just more is just given away as opposed to somehow, even if it's just a mental, kind of like with money, it's just a mental thing that people see it that way, perceive it that way. Uh, to have it an earned basic income versus just like you're gonna turn 18 and we're just gonna fucking hand you all this money. Um, I think that's just better for society. But
But you,
but
but
I'm not.
that presupposes that people, but you're presupposing that if people have a universal basic income, that number one, they're not going to use it for their basic necessities. And in my case, I'm a stay-at-home dad. I mean, I could get work right now if I want to. I guess technically this would be viewed as my work, but some people aren't able to work for different reasons, maybe disability, whatever. Um, but I guess the point is, if you had a universal basic income, it wouldn't just apply to the person that's disabled, quote unquote. Everyone would
Right.
get the benefit of a universal basic income regardless of circumstance. But I guess that's presupposing that too, that the people, as you suggest, would be lazy and they wouldn't have innovative spirit if they
Yeah.
had a universal basic income. I don't believe that. I don't even know if the majority of people would actually be like that. I don't think it will make people any lazier than they are now if you think that people are lazy under the current
Yeah.
scenario without a universal basic income. I'm not convinced that if people had extra money in their pocket that they would be more lazy if you assume that right now people are lazy
Right.
without a bit UBI.
But if your money is nothing, it wasn't earned somehow, it just starts to stack up. So like go back to the idea of military service becoming like jobs. So what if you had like a required government service out of high school, for 2 years, something similar to like Israel or Russia, right? You have that, you do your service, you learn road construction or whatever, but then also in that time, based on your attributes and what you've learned, you get your universal basic income based off of that. And then there's just different levels of it.
So that's an incentive based like scale of universal basic income is what you're saying.
Right. Because then that also, because there's going to be people that will still work too. Like I said, you'd have people who go out, and if you want to earn more than what you need, you can keep working. I think that needs to be available to people that want to keep working. They need to be able to earn more. Um, so, but
But
yeah, so there, like I said, there's just ways to approach your universal basic income to just get people in the right mindset so that when they do get it, they are investing in their life and investing in the earth rather than just waiting to turn into an adult and then just basically live off of what would be a welfare universal basic income. Like even if you felt you earned enough in your 2 years of government service that your little check that you got was enough and you could work with it, that's fine. And I don't think that there's any reason we should make the cost of living too expensive for something like that. But I think that's another kind of thing with me and checks and balances is if we can bring the cost of living down too, right? It's not just about changing the dollar, but just like how much things cost. If people can make more, but then things also cost less, it makes everything stronger.
yeah, but that sounds I don't want to say it sounds utopian. Like to me, that's the way. In other
Yeah,
words, we both can remember a time. I'm 41 years old. I remember a time when your money went a lot further.
yeah,
You could buy things and you could go on a vacation. You could actually go on family vacations. When
there.
my parents, without college degrees in the
Mhm.
80s, we were still very poor. It was seven of us living together in a rural area. But in the early 90s, my parents moved to the city and they only paid $35,000 for a house, a family of five. And we were able to go on family vacations and we were able to get basic necessities and everything else. You could actually have a savings account back then. And
Yeah,
it doesn't sound like any of that is going on now.
yeah, and that's a concept. Is explained. There's this movie. Oh gosh, it's probably about 11, 12 years old, maybe a little older. It's called Death of the American Dream. It's a cartoon. It's free. It's on YouTube. You can find it. Um, they explain in this because they're explaining like credit card debt, and it's one of it's one of the staple videos if you're into this kind of stuff back here. It's one of the staple videos that goes over concepts you'll hear in other places too. But they talk about the value of gasoline in 1950 or the value of a shoe. That itself is worth the exact same as it was in 1950. All that extra money on top of it is inflation. And you really should check out this video. I mean, it's been out for years. Some of the characters are a little outdated because of that. But yeah, that's a really good basic one. They explain the whole creature at Jekyll Island. They explain fractional reserve banking. They explain coin clipping, all the way back in world history, and how it works, and how it's destroying the United States.
Okay, I want to segue into the final part of this discussion, which is criminal justice. That's been a stance that I pretty much, it's a topic that I've addressed to all the people in the field that have come onto the forum. I believe we're going to have one more person that's running outside of the Democrats and the Republicans. And full disclosure, there's a possibility that there's one person that was running under one of the two major parties could be coming onto the forum. I'm in talks with their team right now. I'm not going to tell who that person is until it actually happens, but we're pretty much confident in saying that Cornel West will be on the show, in addition to someone else down the road. But we'll just keep it at that right now. And the criminal justice discussion, I don't see anything on your site as far as stances about the drug war, stances about the criminal justice system, the way it's currently established and function and executed right now. But what is your stance? Like, what is the Gavin Bonney stance on criminal justice reform? What could we expect in the Gavin Bonney administration?
You can expect a lot of people with marijuana misdemeanors to walk on home. I'll tell you that much. um, as far as like the war on drugs and criminal justice, there's an industrial complex there, just the same as the military. I'm not a big fan of it. They do violate a lot of human rights. There's just a lot of people, especially in like the state of Louisiana. I hate to throw them under the bus, but there's actually more people in federal prison, I think, in Louisiana than in like middle school and elementary school. That's an industry, and like they have that. Louisiana is a state where they have like one of those 3-strike laws where you can do something as simple as shoplifting like a bag of peanut M&Ms, and if it's the third time and you're caught, that's 25 years. That's stupid. Like there's a saying on a meme that goes around. I actually kind of like it. If you see someone stealing food, no, you didn't.
Mm.
And so there's not a lot of emphasis as far as campaigning on criminal. I mean, if I have to, I will. I'd be taking a pretty similar approach to how I look at everything. And me being someone that's kind of pro open borders in the long run once everything's established. That's a lot of the prison population as far as I'm concerned right there. People are detained for illegally crossing borders and things like that. But I think the big thing for me would be finding a way to de-incentivize the prison industrial complex, because in the United States, you're supposed to be innocent until proven guilty. So there shouldn't be a desire or even a push to fill prisons, right? The prison system needs to be there. There's going to be people, there's going to be people that snap. There's going to be people that break and do immoral things. But to industrialize it and try to keep people in it, like being the part of Oregon I'm from, actually, I've dealt with a lot of people who are on parole for dumb things for their entire life. It all starts with a minor in possession of marijuana or even alcohol, but then for 20-30 years they're actually best friends with the county sheriff because they have to take a pee test every month. because something happened, right at the end of whatever session or breakthrough they're at. You did another little stupid thing, like got a speeding ticket, or maybe that's a bad example, but just the little things while you're still under parole, then you get in trouble, and then they compound it, and it's not helping people. So I guess my thing would be just to take a human approach at it, like anything else. I mean, obviously, I'm not going to start letting like murderers out. That doesn't go with my kind of moral standing and upbringing. But yeah, as far as like the war on drugs, if you're pushing stuff across board, there's going to be case to case stuff as far as like trafficking, because then you're talking about bigger federal offenses that were a different situation at the time and everything, right? Because those are people that were making money off the grid, off the taxes, maybe even killing people, et cetera, et cetera. But at the lower levels, there's just going to be a lot of people walking home. If you're in jail for possession of marijuana, like, that's stupid.
Yeah, but that's what I'm trying to get at is,
Yeah.
wouldn't that de-incentivize cartels and the drug trafficking, as you say? I mean, you said you're for open borders, so at that point,
Yeah.
if we have
So,
open borders,
okay, and here's kind of is a little abstract. What if because most of these drugs are made of other drugs, right? You get pharmaceutical companies. What if you just legitimize the cartels? Because then there's a whole bunch of structure actually that's already there. Gangs have structure the same as the military. That's very abstract, but like, if you could legitimize some of these cartels, not all of them, obviously, for whatever reasons, various reasons, but like, you legitimize what these people are doing because they are moving medicine, right? So
yeah, I think, yeah.
I mean, what ketamine's just liquid cocaine, right? Or whatever. So like, so if you need ketamine, you need to get cocaine, which grows in South America.
I guess,
there's a lot of pharmaceuticals companies that could actually benefit. And it's just silly. They could actually benefit more from the open borders than from creating a drug on war. But
yes, but as far as the drugs are concerned, see, I have so many thoughts just based on that
yeah,
response. But what I was going to get at, the question I had was, what is the current state of drug policy in Oregon right now? Because are drugs decriminalized? Like, what is the like? So people can understand.
drugs are decriminalized. You can still get arrested for trafficking, selling. I think there's limits on amounts you can possess. There's like with mushrooms, there's like an automatic amount. If you have it, you're going to get hit with attempt to distribute. I'm not totally sure, but as far as being high, you are completely allowed to be high on whatever drug. And but there are still like little possession misdemeanors. So there's decriminalized. You're not going to go to jail for having like an 8-ball on you. But you might get a ticket. But you can just be as high as you want on whatever.
Yeah, but that's they're not legal. They're still not legal, so there's still ramifications.
It's just decriminalized. Whatever decriminalized means to you might not mean the same to the government. It's kind of loose terminology. Because I think basically they get tired of detaining people or putting people in a hospital just because they're high, or they could have just gone to the hospital instead of like arrested them. So I'm not really sure. Because like, who was it? Ron Paul wanted to legalize all the drugs because he thinks it would deter people from doing them. But I don't know that I'm seeing that in Oregon, just from this initial decriminalization. I'm not really sure. I know they're trying to bring out medicinal mushrooms, which is a great thing, I think. But as far as the decriminalization, not really sure that much has changed, because you can still get tickets. And a lot of this stuff already was pretty well decriminalized. And I knew when I was like a teenager and in my 20s, I knew I was allowed to be high on whatever as long as I didn't have it in my possession in the state of Oregon. So
You said that you would decriminalize marijuana. Would you legalize marijuana under your administration? And would you deschedule it completely and not consider it a drug? Because right now it's considered
yeah,
in the same category as heroin right now.
yeah, which is stupid. Schedule one narcotic. No, it's a medicine. I would definitely make it so we're not like throwing people in jail over it anymore. I have some kind of from growing medical marijuana when I was younger. I kind of have actually some conservative views on how to use it and to sell it. I'm not necessarily a big fan of how some places have implemented recreational marijuana. Those are all personal opinions. The overall message takeaway, like, yeah, marijuana will be legal.
Will be
100%.
legal, not
Will
decriminalized, but
will be
legal.
we will, yeah, it'll be legal. Like you can grow it, smoke it. The thing is it's so easy to grow. Uh, like there's almost no need for dispensaries. Um, and
So
so yeah, so it would be I would have to work with a team of people on how we implemented the policies, because me personally, I would just be like, yeah, it's legal, grow it, go ahead. I don't give a shit. Like I'm not gonna try to tax it. Personally, I wouldn't try to tax it. Um I view it as like God's medicine, more or less. So I will need people to kind of check and balance me on that one. But like I said, the overall message, like, yeah, that's gonna be legal, 100%. It's
and as far as the ramifications that that decision would have on other areas, that is innately a criminal justice issue, because we have so many people caught up in the system because of marijuana. I know too many
yeah,
people, my own family included,
right.
caught up in the system. A lot of these people, I'm not saying that white people aren't affected, but the people that I grew up that were affected by this were black people, and 40%
Well,
of
and
the
that
carceral population is black. So there is a dynamic
in
going on there.
yeah in the initial prohibition of marijuana, two of the main reasons for it, protect the DuPonts and the Morgans, because marijuana hemp makes great rope. And then the other thing was because for some reason we didn't like jazz musicians, Mexicans and black people. We wanted to arrest them. So, and they found that a lot of Mexicans and black people like to smoke marijuana, so they made it illegal. And that's the bulk of it. People didn't want to lose their industry, and bigots. Kind of sad.
And 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 so what would change under your administration? Because you already alluded to the prison complex, but then we get into the whole idea of because my experience is the police going around the neighborhood and basically seeing if people are selling drugs or whatever.
Mhm.
To me, that's a serious problem, because
Yeah.
the same people who talk about like freedom, you would think that, and I'm not talking about you, I'm just saying that I'm speaking a lot to my conservative audience that's watching this, or even libertarian audience. If we're talking about freedom and you want people to be free to go where they want to go, if we're legalizing drugs at this point, especially marijuana, then what do we need to do as far as like how do we attack that a part of the issue, the police state part of this? Because the war on drugs is not just um the drugs themselves, but people are also attached to these
Yeah. This
problems.
this is another abstract idea. My kind of thing with police, I'm actually not a big fan of police. I'm one of those military guys. But I always thought it would be really cool if you were having a bad day. Um, if you could call a cop and just go for a ride in the cruiser, right? Um, so what if we trained our police in a way to where they actually did try to solve your problems or calm you down, or could do something where, like, if you're in a domestic situation or a suicidal situation or something like that, instead of the cop looking for what drugs you're doing to throw you in jail, what if they did like, oh, let's, I mean, shit, Dodge Chargers are pretty fast. Oh, you want to go for a ride? Let's go for a ride. You get like a dog. Call the cop, call the police, be like, hey, like I could really just use somebody to talk to, or like everything's off. And you get in a Dodge Charger, you go for a ride out in the country. If we could policy our police to where you could do that and still have them, able to protect and arrest people when they needed to, I think that would be a really good thing. And I think that's what a lot of people kind of like are trying to get at with the fund to police protests and things like that. I don't think any of that stuff worked out the way they wanted it to, but that is kind of something I've thought of as far as police is. To me, I need police to be smarter, and I need them to be human. I don't need them to just follow orders like it is now. So there would be some changes there, and maybe even bring police officering or being a police officer up to a federal level. Even if you are a county sheriff or a state or a city, if you brought in some kind of national policing policy that could, kind of like the military, that kept all of them in check. Like you're local to this area and this jurisdiction, but you're all under this federal mandate or this federal set of rules, this standard of how to conduct yourself with other people, and when it's okay to do certain things, et cetera, et cetera. Because another issue I have with police in general is the rumors that if you have a certain ASVAB score, which is the military aptitude, if you're over like a 75, there's rumors that there's a lot of stations, police organizations that won't take you because you're too smart. You won't follow orders. You won't enforce laws the way they want you to enforce them. And that's just, that goes back to professionalism. I think, like you were saying, my overall vision for the government in general is to be a little more professional and militant and on point and polished, because there's no reason for it not to be, and that's the only way we're going to make the world a better place.
Oh, I wasn't saying anything about professionalism.
Yeah.
I was saying
Well,
more
no,
so the way you presented it on your site
Yeah.
was the way the military is supposed to conduct itself. Like that's, and I have my own views about military. I don't agree with wars. Particularly, that's all I say about it. I don't really have much to comment as far as the military itself. The police state, I have a serious problem with. To me, the police state is tied to the military, and so I see police as an extension of the military. That's the way I see it.
Yeah.
I want to believe that fellow police officers have my best interest, but the reality is that a lot of us don't trust the police. I still don't trust the police, and a lot of citizens, when they're in dire straits situations, don't see the police as a person to call necessarily.
Right.
So
And
I think we have to change those attitudes, but we're not at that point yet. I think you're speaking from a point if we're already at that point where people can trust the police, but I don't think we're there.
Right. No, we're not even close. And a lot of it has it with their hiring. People know, like, kind of around the military, like, say you go back to the concept of martial law is declared. The politicians actually don't have necessarily the military to protect them the same way they do have the police to protect them, because our military policies, and that, not saying that everyone's going to follow this is like, goodwill towards, hoping for goodwill, but the military is not supposed to attack the citizens. Like that is against the UCMJ. That's against, we are not supposed to do that. So if martial law was to be declared in a way that the government was trying to do some kind of hostile takeover or something, it would be the police. It wouldn't be the military. I'm not saying that they couldn't manipulate military personnel into doing it, but in black and white, the way it's written now, it would be the police.
And that's a scary thought. And I think that's the first time that this has even been brought up on the forum. But that's the reason why we need to really, because that's the first line of defense. That's who we see first. We don't see the tanks. We don't see the soldiers in the gear. We see the police. And that's a scary thought, because we already know the scenarios that can be drawn up to where the police would be taken out executing, those orders, even before the military comes in. But it creates a lot of insecurities in people, I think, and there's a lot more I want to ask, but maybe we can save those questions for the presidential forum, because honestly, you being the last candidate that has the second interview, we've interviewed everyone already one time. You've been interviewed a second time today. There's going to be a lot more that can be built from this conversation, and we're going to have a lot of different questions for um, everyone that's running for public office at the highest level in this country in December. We will announce that date in a couple of weeks on one of the episodes. But I want to say that a lot of these questions will be a variety of questions. They're not going to be just national defense. They're not just going to be policing, money. There's going to be a variety of questions. But just to give people a clear picture, there's not going to be a lot of culture war questions, honestly. That's not to say that we won't have a couple of questions. And I don't want that to be interpreted as something where, Kiko, you just don't want to avoid certain topics. No, it's not that at all. I just want to have productive conversations. I'm tired of this condemning the other. Like, I'm just not doing that stuff anymore. And I see that happening too many times. And to me, it's honestly kind of boring. I mean, if you get the conversations that we've played already throughout this forum's history, which is a little bit over a year of its establishment, it's clear where I stand on a lot of positions. And it's clear where people that I interview stand on these positions. We don't have to point at each other and be like, oh, that person's less transphobic or less racist or more racist. We agree that transphobia and homophobia, racism shouldn't even be a part of the discussion. So it's like, let's talk about ways in a productive context to where we can, when it's fit, we can discuss and attack those issues. But I'm just not going to create scenarios out of thin air. I'm going to take it scenario by scenario. And there are situations that do come up where we do need to emphasize LGBTQ awareness and stuff. But just for the sake of saying, hey, I'm a gay person, I'm a black person, I'm not, you're not going to see that a lot on this forum. And if people go back to the episodes, I've had trans people on this forum, I've had gay people, black people, I've had intersex people, I've had indigenous people. So I have these people on the forum, but I don't have to advertise it in your face. Hey, this person is gay, pansexual, bisexual. I don't do that type of stuff. And so, and that's the way I think it should be, because I think humanity, I think the people themselves don't necessarily want to be labeled as such. I think people want to live their lives, and I think people need to treat people with common decency. But we have to definitely stop condemning people because they don't necessarily have a cultural lens. I see too much of it. I understand that people aren't going to be on my cultural level of understanding. That's a part of my job in education. But we have to get to that point. We just can't assume that people are going to get there on their own. And you're not helping the cause by trashing people. So I want to believe that people have good intentions. I want to give people the benefit of the doubt. And I think we need to stop assuming that people don't have that potential. And the people who do the condemnation, a lot of times aren't even at the cultural threshold in the first place to be the person judging the person. And so I want to say that to everybody out there, just let's talk to people like the humans, first of all. Let's be respectful of people. That's all I ask of people. And then we can go from there.
Yeah, I totally agree. And you hit on a lot of things that I agree with there.
Yeah, you
Uh,
seem to want to say something, but you're like, okay, I agree with that. It's just
yeah,
and it's not a way to
yeah.
avoid the topics. I mean, we pretty much
Well,
dealt
no,
with any type of topic we can deal with on this forum. And so for the audience, if you want to hear different types of stuff, let me know. But honestly, I don't get that complaint from my audience because you really never know what you're going to get. And I think that's the suspense behind the forum is that we do attack and talk about different types of topics. And that's the way I want it to be. I want it to be an open forum.
yeah. And I don't want to hit on necessarily the social hot buttons either, because those are designed to paint anybody ugly. It's um everyone's allowed. There's certain things that you're just going to be your personal opinion, your personal way of dealing with it, and that people need to not be arguing about those things, with each other. That's stupid. Um, and another thing I was kind of laughing when you were talking. It's like, if it did come down to, just come down to like shucking and jiving and talking trash. Gosh, dude, I'm 36 years old from the West Coast. um, I don't think that's not the kind of it's not the kind of situation you want to put yourself in with me, because that would just uh, well, I don't as far, and especially at this level, I don't want to argue with anybody at this level, but at the higher level, say I was at there, that's just, oh man, that's really easy pickings. Um, so, but
Yeah,
yeah,
but it is a tough it's tough when it seems like there is a litmus test on it seems like there's a litmus test on stances information and there has to be this protocol that's met.
yeah,
I just think that I don't know if it's just a lack of respect for people or what. This just like for instance, I'm not I am getting into a cultural issue like a hot button issue. The whole idea about pronouns around people who prefer pronouns, me personally, I don't see it as any different. My name is Jerry. My real name is
right.
Jerry, but I don't prefer to be called Jerry. I prefer to be called Kiko. So I don't see that as any different. I think if people use like common sense, like universal experiences,
Yeah,
they would realize that it's not really that big of a deal. I don't understand.
it's not.
People feel like their rights have been taken away just because you're addressing somebody as whatever their
Yeah.
preferred pronoun is. I just don't know how this stuff has gotten so blown out of proportion. It
Well,
doesn't make any sense.
and on the other hand, it's also like, if you misgender somebody in public, like, calm down, you know, allow them to be corrected. Don't jump down their throat, because if you jump down their throat, they're just going to argue with you. They're going to find all the toxic thoughts in their brain about your existence, and
Mm-hmm.
it's just like, okay, say if I want to be called a girl, but I don't look like a girl to this person, and they call me sir, I can be like, hey, I actually prefer to be called ma'am, um, as opposed to like, excuse me, did you just assume like the, I don't know how much of that actually happens, because I was someone who didn't wear a mask a lot during COVID, um, and I wasn't, I'm not someone that's in people's faces in general, and I honestly got some of the best customer service in general during that time, because I would sit behind my shopping cart. I wouldn't try to get in anybody's face, um, and I'd be sitting there, and the clerk, I'd stay behind the plastic. I remember one time, this was this guy with the mask. He was getting behind the plastic in the cashier's face, like trying to point to something on the screen, and you could tell the cashier was just so completely uncomfortable with them
Mm-hmm.
being in their space like that. And it was during when a lot of people, like, it was 90% of the store was people in masks, conservative or liberal, um and it's just like, gosh, this is just, that's such a common sense thing in the first place, your personal space. And then I walked up, I kept my cart between the pay thing and then me, and I didn't wear a mask. I didn't advance towards the cashier, and I got that particular time was some of the best customer service I ever got. Because the person was just so relieved I wasn't in their face. And I think that's a way to kind of approach a lot of these hot button topics, is what have you actually experienced? What do you actually experience with people when you're out in the world?
That's a nice way to look at it. I did have one final question. It kind of goes back to the first conversation and the first part of that conversation. When I hear the word independent, you're running as an independent. Do you see that as, because a lot of people see they're more of us than anybody. I identify as an independent, but I think the terminology is twisted, because what I see in the mainstream media and what I see normally from people, if you talk to everyday people, they see independent as, I'm not a Democrat or I'm not a Republican. But that's not the way I see independent. How do you view an independent? And I'll tell you what I view as an independent.
You familiar with Chris Rock?
Uh-huh.
I'm liberal about some shit. I'm conservative about some shit. That's being an independent to me. That's all there is to it.
But I think that that's a serious problem with people that are running for public office that are third party and independent. I think my biggest criticism, honestly, for people who are running, there's no reason why we shouldn't have a large third party movement or independent movement. We can only go back to the 18.9% national support that Ross Perot got in 1992 to even in recent history to compare to. Like, ever since then, it's just dropped consistently. That it's to the point where people use this spoiler terminology to describe people who aren't running as a Democrat or Republican. You're just a spoiler. Like, you're not going to win, so why even be involved in the race? You hear this all the time in presidential cycles. But I think if someone is an independent, they need to specify that I want to build an independent movement outside of the two-party system. I don't ever hear that. When I think there's a difference between being an independent and simply saying that I'm not a Democrat or Republican, because that ultimately means that people are going to assume when the time comes, you're going to choose one option or the other. I don't see independent that way. I see independent as simply, no, I don't believe in that system. I don't believe in being a Democrat or a Republican. I want to build something outside of that. And I don't hear that enough, and I don't see enough sustainability in these candidates. And a lot of people do go back to just supporting the blue side or the red side because they don't see any viability in their own independence. So what would you say to people, including yourself, what do we need to do to build an independent movement and give people the power to say, you know what, I don't have to be a Democrat or Republican, and I don't have to be shamed for being that?
The exposure, and then I'll put it pretty frankly, to get the exposure, you got to buy into it. If you're going to say I'm an independent thinker, or I want to at least see like I'll still be blue or red, but I want to see that third, you've got to buy into it, which means you've got to invest into it. So, I don't like asking people for money, but it's like, you're going to have to give me some money, because that's the only way any of us can defeat the media system. Like I actually do. I have my ways through naval service and being an athlete in general. I could get to the TV if I had money, if I had capital to show these other people that could, take me seriously. But it gets to the point you have to buy into it. You have to play the game that's already being played. And that doesn't necessarily always mean donations and buying stuff. It is sharing this podcast, or sharing the website, like in the case of my website, you have to have that exact link because they still want more money for me to get my domain name. Well, I'm not going to get enough money for that domain name with some of my other bills if people don't start buying into it. And that's why I still try to do these interviews, even though I know I'm a bit of a hermit crab. It only takes a little bit, you know, and to get the snowball rolling. But that's more at the end of the day, any kind of, you know, mind over matter thing. You got to start buying into it. You got to start believing that you can push. I think something when I was pushing for Gary Johnson in 2016, I think this, if you start polling at 10%, CNN and Fox takes you on. You'd be independent, libertarian, whatever. You reach that threshold, you're exposed. And I think for someone like me in particular, you reach that threshold and you become undefeatable. But to get to that threshold, people have to buy in.
And so that's interesting, your response to that, the visibility aspect of it. I thought that was actually one of the first things I thought about. But I'm going to try to see if I can get John Stasevich on. John Stasevich ran as an independent. He dropped out of the race relatively early. We've become friends since. And he was a favorite to a lot of people in the forum. I really thought John was building something strong in his independent candidacy. He had worked previously under the Obama administration. I think he had done like phone banking and a bunch of stuff for the Bernie Sanders campaign. He also did a lot of work. He knew a lot of higher ups. So he had experience going in as far as the visibility aspect. He realized that he wasn't getting the traction that he wanted, so he ended up dropping out. So in case the audience wants to know what happened to John Stasevich, he dropped out of the race. I actually went to his house. Before he dropped out of the race, we, you know, had an exchange. We talked. We did another interview while we were there. That was independent from this forum, and it wasn't me promoting him. It was simply we had a discussion. I was already in Michigan anyway, so I had a conversation with him. Good guy. He's in his 70s now. He's 71, I believe. But we talked, and he talked about some of the problems running as an independent. One of the major problems is that I'm an independent forum, but independents have a problem with even going on the more high-profile independent forums. I'm not going to expose too much of what we talked about off air, but there's an issue in independent media not putting the money where the mouth is. It doesn't cost a thing to invite guests on to simply have an interview. It doesn't cost these people a dime. But the people, do they not have enough clicks if they bring on a certain person or they don't? Yeah. So we don't have enough independent-minded people who say that they're independent really aren't independent. Because at that point, they're creating a tier of independence based on how popular you are as an independent coming in. Yeah. And so, yes, I will throw the Jimmy Dores. I'll throw the Russell Brands under the bus because these people, to me, aren't really independent. To me, they're different level. They're basically the mainstream media at this point. Joe Rogan, the mainstream media at this point. Sure, They may have started out independent, but to me, when you have that high of a profile and you don't pinpoint people like Gavin Bonney and John Stasevich and Brittany Jones.
I emailed Joe Rogan and he didn't respond. I only emailed him once.
They have this capacity, and even people who are small scale, and I'm not going to mention their name because I want to protect the innocent. Let's just say these people have 100,000 followers. They may not even have that many. Let's say that they have 40,000 followers, 30,000. I know the people. I'm not going to name drop on this forum. I don't do that here. But these people get so big, quote unquote. They go from a small channel like I have, around 300 subscribers, and they get bigger. But then they don't invite certain guests on because they get to a certain tier of independence within the algorithm treats them a little bit better. Yeah. But they don't advocate for people who are running outside of the two-party system. So I think we need more collaboration from those voices in order to get to that. And hopefully the presidential forum that we have in December, would be a vehicle. I want it to be a vehicle for people to maybe be invited on free equal elections. I don't know if you're familiar with that organization, Free Equal Elections. I'm actually going to interview the president of Free Equal Elections, Christina Tobin, who gives people a higher platform. And so hopefully the point of this forum is to get people even more visible. And maybe I may become that platform eventually. I may become an independent. I don't want to be Joe Rogan. Honestly, I don't want to be that popular because I think once in this culture, if you're that popular, that means you have. I'm not gonna say that. I'm not gonna say what I really want to say. So I said to myself because I don't want to be mean to people. But I just think that you have to have a certain level of clickbait type stuff to get that big. Honestly,
Yeah.
I would not want to have 10 million followers.
Right.
Not doing it this way anyway. If I got a million people doing it this way, that would mean a lot.
Yeah.
But let's just do what we're doing right now and just promote people who are trying to do the right things and promote independence, promote free thought. And I don't know, Mr. Gavin Bonney, if you have any final thoughts, because I don't want to keep talking too much. We're well into 2 hours into the discussion, which I didn't think going in that we would talk over 2 hours. I was thinking more an hour and a half. But I've enjoyed this discussion,
Yeah.
and I hope my audience does as well. But I want to leave it to you. Any final words or thoughts that you may have for my audience, and where people can reach you in case they had a question or a comment.
Um, I I guess my main thing would just be like a call to arms if you're interested, or if you want to see me elaborate more or get me more in the light. You guys can contact me through Twitter. Um, and I mean, I guess I'm recruiting people to kind of get behind the get behind the force, because the more support I start to get, the bigger I'll snowball fast. I know I will. But it's very hard dealing with personal issues and just, you know, being this independent in the first place. I'm a very independent person, like a husky dog as it is. So um, yeah, I hope that some people hear what I have to say and reach out to me. I wish I had a better email or something for people to email, but the Twitter will be fine. Just contact me there. If anybody wants to run the Twitter for me and things like that, I'm ready to go. I just need some people to come out from the woodworks. I've got a background in performance arts. I just need people and capital to kind of start to show up.
And I think that's the dilemma for everyone that's come on the forum. The, you're obviously at a disadvantage monetarily speaking,
Yeah.
and regarding the technology component. Even some of the people who have come on the forum who have hundreds of thousands of followers on TikTok, for instance, certain
Mhm.
platforms, they still deal with a lot of suppression. Brittany Jones have had she's given those frustrations to the forum previously. So I think even when you do get to a certain level, you will definitely start to get resistance because you start to threaten the system at that point that's intact. But hopefully, my forum again, please share, subscribe to this video, subscribe to the forum, and tell your friends and family about it. You know, one by one, you never know who this is going to reach. I got some new support yesterday, not monetary support, but I got more support from Twitter. I've started to be a little bit more active on Twitter. That's actually how I came across you. I didn't know who you were before. I saw where we followed each other. I think you may have followed me first. And
Yeah,
I don't even
I
know how
was,
you found out about me personally, which I
I,
thought
when I started Twitter, I just kind of was whatever, whatever came in and bit or liked, or I just tried to follow it and just see. That was my technique at first. Yeah, and it worked okay. My social media presence needs a filter. So anybody out there who is into that type of thing, get in contact with me.
What do you mean
Because
a filter? Do you mean as far as the content's concerned?
yeah, well, yeah, I'm a young man, and I say things. I would say I have far less of a filter than some of the people that uh, we don't like, or society's not a big fan of.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, but so I just need to be kept in check there. Because my main thing is to just I want to reform. I want to make the world a better place and actually do the job at hand, get it done, and then go on with my life. I kind of joke with my counselor. I don't think he quite gets it. I'm like, I want to be president before I get my doctorate, so that I have something to do after um, after I'm the president. I go get my doctorate afterwards. So
So, so just so the audience has this information, what's the easiest way to contact you? And I will link your site in the episode description.
yeah, so link the site. You know what to do there.
Mm-hmm.
And I have to remember my my Twitter handle. And maybe hopefully I can get maybe I'll set something up that you can
I'll definitely link that in the description, your Twitter
there
information.
it is. Okay. It's at sign Bonney Bonney fourth numeral 4 Prez Prez.
Bonnie for Prez.
Mm-hmm.
At Bonnie for Prez is the handle. I will also link the Google Doc, which is Mr. Bonnie's official website. It has all of his policy information there. Um, Again, a very interesting site because it has a lot of humor in it. You talked earlier about your interest in stand up. Um, you like
Yeah.
that for sure. I can see the humor in your site. It may go over some people's heads, but I definitely
Yeah.
saw it as funny. I think it's creative. It's a good way to get younger people. I think for sure. Um, but I just want to say thank you for having this conversation. Thanks for coming back onto the forum, and we're looking forward to hearing your thoughts and getting some of your solutions from the audience when we have this presidential forum in December. And I'll give you all the rules and the protocols when the time is fit. But I want to say thank you again, Mr. Bonney. Beautiful people, enjoy your day. On Sunday, we have the People's Party of Texas coming up, and we have a plethora of guests lined up for the month of October. I believe we have 13 or 14 interviews left for the month of October, and that's not including December and November. So we have a lot of activity on the forum. Subscribe to Kiko's Free Thinkers Forum. We're not emphasizing the podcast version as much. You can subscribe there too as well. Any of your Spotify, your Radio Public, your Apple, your Google, your Amazon, whatever you use for audio podcasting. But we're really trying to push the YouTube channel. That's where most of the traction is. We have 90 different countries we've reached already, and we want to continue reaching more people one click at a time. So subscribe for free. It doesn't cost you anything. And please subscribe to Amir Napier, her Empathic Times as well, episode 66. We talked about Palestine. A lot of her content is not the same as mine, but she puts a lot of work into her channel, and she's an independent thinker. And so I always like to promote those channels. Empathic Times, EMPHATIC Times, and you can go back to episode 66 and you can watch her latest episode. But I want to say thank you again, Mr. Gavin Bonney, episode 37 and now episode 68.
Yeah.
We appreciate you and enjoy your day. Thank you so much.
I do want to give one last shout out. If you do go and check out the memes, a lot of the memes are original in the humor, but I'd like to give a shout out to at Decelerate Your Life, at Smoke Official, Shit My LPO Says, Action Figure Therapy, any of that we'll call enlisted underground movement, any enlisted humor people. I couldn't have developed some of my viewpoints and this site without you. I don't even actually know a lot of you by name, but so if you're out there and you're enlisted and you're in the mafia, let's do this.
So let's get this video out. Let's make it viral. Let's get it out so we can get your name out. And that goes for all the candidates that are running. You really need to be promoting your content because we're at the stretch now. You know, we're talking about a year from now before we really, I guess you have technically 14 months left, I guess, something like that. I'm not exactly, I'm so confused. That time is so weird to me right now. So we have about 13 months left. So we really got
Yeah,
to get going to
I,
promote information.
I'd like to get popping in time to maybe sit in on some 49ers games. That's probably the only way I'm going to be able to afford a ticket this year. So,
Beautiful people, enjoy your day, and we will talk soon. Cheers.
cheers.